Hey and welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be talking you through my autumn TBR. I've picked out a really nice selection of books for myself. Some of them are books that I've been meaning to read for years. Some of them I've been purposely procrastinating on reading this year so that I could read them during the autumn season so I could really get the most out of my reading experience. So I'll talk to you about what I'm currently reading, which I only started about 2 days ago and I'm not very far in at all. So I'm sorry that my description is going to be atrocious, but I really don't know the suss on this book yet. So I'm reading Uncle Silas by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, and this is a horror / thriller / gothic book, and it's fairly chunky, but you know what, it's not as big as I thought it was going to be before I picked it up. So I was like, yeah, that's kind of realistic to get through. This was meant to be the classic that I wanted to read in September, and I technically did start it in September, but at the very end. So this is about a young girl who ends up becoming orphaned and having to live with her uncle Silas. And Silas is this really mysterious character because he's very much ostracized by the local town area. Basically, he's supposedly, allegedly commits some sort of atrocious crime. And what we're trying to figure out is if he actually did do it or if there's something else at play here. And you know, I'm so excited to finally read this. I've had a few people recommend this to me over the years. More so people generally recommend Carmela to me because that is supposedly one of the first vampire stories ever written. I still haven't read that. I'll get to it at some point, don't worry. But yeah, I feel like this is kind of more up my street. And I think this is going to be the only sort of thriller novel that I'm going to be reading over this period. And you know, sometimes it's nice to read thrillers over the autumn season. Next is Gothic Tales by Elizabeth Gaskell. So this is a short story collection. And the reason why I picked this up is because there is one short story in this that focuses on the Salem witch trials. And that's one that I've been curious about for years. And I've heard nothing but great things about this collection. And you know me, I love a horror short story collection. I love a gothic horror short story collection. So I'm very much sticking to my roots with this pick. Since this is a short story collection, I didn't want to delve too deep into reading people's reviews about it because I find that short stories can be very, very easily spoiled. And I'd like to go in with my blinders on and not really know what to expect and hopefully come out with a really positive experience. And I'm looking forward to being able to chat to you about it at some point again during the month. Now that I'm picking up books and getting through this, I'm realizing I've actually picked out a good few short story collections, but you know, there's no harm in that. So the next one is The Dark Eidolon and Other Fantasies by Clark Ashton Smith. This is a book that has been, this is an author that has been recommended to me several times over the years. Especially for kind of more obscure sort of horror. Now, I'm aware that I think this might be more fantasy-based stuff, but I'm not going to let that put me off because I have this year been making a solid effort to read more from the fantasy genre and not to be as closed off to it as I have been in previous years. The recommendations on the back of this, like Ray Bradbury has a quote, he has been compared to H.P. Lovecraft, which I feel like I don't think that's particularly hard to achieve these days. I feel like most authors a lot of the time are blurbed to be like, oh, not since H.P. Lovecraft have we seen anyone with this sort of innovative writing style, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. So that doesn't really impress me that much, but this is a collection of short stories and poems. Do you know what? It's been a fairly long time since I've read any sort of poetry at all. So again, this is another one that I'm looking forward to getting into. And then my final book of short stories is one that I started a couple of years ago and then I never ended up finishing it. And ever since then, now that I've had it sitting around for these last couple of years, it really bothers me that I'm halfway through that and I need to finish that. And I've told myself like, oh, well, it's a short story collection. I can go back to it whenever I feel like it because it's not like I'm halfway through an actual novel and then I just stopped reading it. You know, it's a bit different. I'm basically kind of giving myself like an out with it, but I want to finish it. I have no idea whether the rest of the tales in this are actually going to be any sort of horror spooky related stories at all. That shows you how little I've actually researched it, but it is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Other Stories by Washington Irving. So I really, really enjoyed The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I'm so happy to have finally read that after seeing the film like multiple times as like a small child and everything like that. And I just thought it was interesting finally reading the source material. That's usually what I love about reading classics that have been kind of made into films and maybe more popular in kind of pop culture that way rather than the original text. I have no idea what else this has to offer aside from the Headless Horseman. So, you know, I might even reread The Legend of Sleepy Hollow if I have the time. And again, this is probably going to be another one that I end up talking about later in the month. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Sadly, going to be finishing my reread of The Lord of the Rings, and I'll be getting to The Return of the King probably in the next month or so. I'm really sad that I'm going to be finishing this after reading The Hobbit last year at some point. Ever since then, I've picked up these books whenever I've been feeling a little bit down or maybe not super motivated to read. And it's just been such an enjoyable experience, especially reading The Two Towers last, I think it was over spring. It was like earlier this year I read it, and like I was so mentally burnt out with the amount of college work that I was doing. And when it came to that, it just felt like self-care. You know, whenever I picked it up, I was like, this just makes my brain feel good. This makes me forget about all my worries. So in that respect, I'm sad to finally like push on with the series and not have it there for like a little bit of comfort reading. But I'm really excited because I hope to do a kind of an overall review once I'm finished to be like, this is my experience reading it as an adult versus how it was when I was a child and blah blah blah. I don't know, I might not do that video. I feel like I should have been vlogging it the entire time. That would have made it far more interesting, but of course I haven't been because I'm not on the ball. I'm not like one of those YouTubers who's like plans 2 years out, unfortunately. I mean, I can barely plan at all, as you can tell. Next, to get into some more seriousness, and you know, you can't have an autumn TBR and not have anything by Shirley Jackson on there. So I'm going to be reading Hangsaman. So this isn't one that's supernatural based like I've read of her works previously. This is one that's probably going to be super depressing because it's about a young girl who ends up being assaulted and the downfall of her mental health after that experience. I know that Shirley Jackson is a phenomenal writer. For me personally, I absolutely love her work. I'm even contemplating getting like a Shirley Jackson tattoo at some point in the future because that's how much I love her writing, you know? I think she was one of the first authors that really kind of got me into reading Gothic horror. So I know this is probably going to be quite a heavy read for me, and I'll probably put it off until I feel like mentally well enough to kind of crack on with it. Because I know it's just going to make me quite sad, most likely, based on the subject matter. But I know I'll probably really, really enjoy it. And, you know, I'm slowly but surely getting through her work. And, you know, she's one of those authors that I want to really read all of their work. And I think I'm getting close to doing that. So yay, goals. My only sort of big classic that I'm going to be reading is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. I've never read any Anne Bronte. I've only read Emily Bronte. Really enjoyed Wuthering Heights though. I don't know what this really entails. It's more so just, you know, a wicked woman, local gossips, all that kind of thing. It sounds very similar to the plot synopsis of is it Far From the Madding Crowd? One of the Tom Hardy books that I've read anyway in the last year and a half or so. I remember reading this when I got it from my boyfriend there last Christmas and being like, that plot just sounds exactly the same as something else that I've read. I did a little bit of research, you know, when it comes to getting books, especially getting books as gifts. I always want to make sure that it most likely is going to be something that I thoroughly enjoy, because I don't want other people wasting money on books for me that I'm not going to enjoy. So yeah, but hopefully it's good. You know, there's some people who've told me it's absolute trash or that they don't like Anne Bronte at all when I hold it previously. So I was like, maybe, you know, some good vibes would be, you know, appreciated. The last book on my spooky TBR is Ghost Story by Peter Straub. So this is a book that I referenced in my horror novels I still haven't read yet video, or whatever it was called. I think I did it at some point last year or the year before last. And the reason why I picked it up is because it's one that gets referenced quite a lot. I know Stephen King was influenced by it. I know that there are multiple other authors that have referenced this work as being a big influence on them. And, you know, I love reading novels that were influenced or very influential to writers that I really appreciate these days. And I don't really know much about it. It sounds kind of culty, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. It sounds like there's something going on of this Chowder Society, which, you know, not a great name for any sort of society, but again, it sounds very familiar to another story that I read. It sounds quite familiar to as the Great God Pan. That's what the plot kind of reminds me of now that I've read that. So we'll see. Maybe I'll be able to make a solid comparison video at a certain point this year, you know, with all the things that I've read. But I'm so jazzed for this. And if you've read this, let me know how you got on with it and what do you think that I will think of it too, because I'm curious, and it's fairly big too as well, you know. So that has been my autumn TBR. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Let me know what you're going to be reading over the spooky season, and I hope you really enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.